All systems go. Clear for liftoff.
Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy, GS Luke, here with our Round 3 live stream for the Mexico Open. Going to make sure you're ready for all your lineups tomorrow with a look at the weather report, some of the conditions out there from today, some shots gained metrics, strategy out there for Saturday, as well as any questions and deep dives you want down there in chat. But hopefully Saturday or Friday's treating you nicely and you're ready to talk all the golf over here for the weekend. The 6 of 6 is coming in right now. We've got a little bit of a cut sweat going on as well. You can see about a 50-50 chance out there between -3 and -4. So hopefully that's going well out there in your lineups and you can try and make it some momentum over here over the weekend. So first off, if you have any deep dives, any questions, feel free to go ahead and throw those in chat. We're going to start with a look at the golf course from today, which you can see in terms of the scoring average, it played easier in the morning versus the afternoon, which is the opposite of what I expected to happen. And, I by no means claim to be perfect when looking at a golf course, but the weather was a little bit nastier than what they called for. So you can see from around 2-3 p.m., the winds really started to crank out there. And the scoring average for the first, let's say, 2 hours of the PM wave was playing to about a -2.5, -3 scoring average. And as soon as those winds, the gusts went out there and kicked up, you saw it go from a really under par scoring average. In fact, it was tracking to be a little bit easier than what you had there in the morning wave to almost an entire stroke harder. So if you went out there, you had the wherewithal to go out there, play some AM guys, you got the better side of things, but ownership was also on that side of the tee time. So it's worth noting that even with the averages that we had in round one, that a lot of people went out there and played the AM wave. So they went with the historical data versus on top of what we saw out there for round one, which was not the way that I went in hindsight. I wish I would have went that direction, but based on the data that we had, the forecast looking pretty flat and consistent, I didn't see a reason to go out there and change. So it's always good to take a look at these, go through and review what happens from day to day to try and learn from it going forward. So I'm not sure if it's really going to change my process all that much, if I'm frank with you. The wind gusts got a little stronger than what they were calling for. I think I had a lot to do with it, but that also the talent discrepancy out there with the AM guys, they were a lot better on average than what you had in the PM, probably had a lot to do with that as well. So going over to the forecast over there for Saturday, you'll see that they're calling for almost a carbon copy of what we have had for the first few rounds. So morning looking to be extremely calm like you've had for Thursday, Friday. In the afternoon wave, getting closer to 9-10 miles an hour sustained. Now, this is just one of the few models that we have to choose from, but if you take a look at them, they're all rather consistent. This one here, maybe not getting to that 9-10 mile an hour range, but it does go from like 2-3 miles an hour in the morning, closer to 8 miles an hour sustained in the afternoon. And some of the other ones here carry that same kind of sentiment, next to no wind over there in the first half of play, whereas this PM wave, where it's likely going to be the guys towards the top end of the leaderboard, are going to be playing in a little bit more gusty conditions. Now, because we're doing this before the round has ended, we don't know whether there's going to be twosomes or threesomes, but a lot of that is going to come down to how many people make the cut. And because that -3 is holding strong right now, and the more and more that we check over here on Data Golf, -3 is gaining some steam. If it's a -3 cut and we have this many people making the weekend, as of right now, it'd be 75 players, they're going to have to do threesomes off of both tees. So while I do think that the morning wave might have some better conditions, especially if you could get like a 9-10 a.m. local time starter tomorrow, if they were in twosomes off of hole number one, those players might play to a half a stroke to a stroke advantage, because just like they're calling for over here on Friday, and just like we're seeing currently, the winds were kicking up, and that's exactly what they think is going to happen out there tomorrow. So in an ideal world, right, we'd have those twosomes off of hole number one, and we'd try to target some of those earlier starters. Now, maybe not the first few groups out, because they are the guys that just hardly made the cut, and temperatures are going to need to rise over the first few hours of the day. But if they give us those threesomes, and that's kind of why I'm rooting for a -4 cut here. Also, my 6 of 6 rate hardly changes, whether it's -3 or -4. So that partially has to do with the sweat out here as well. But if we do have a -4 cut and it's only going to be, let's say, like 65 to 67 players that are making it to the weekend, then we might actually have those two sums off of hole one. So that's something that you're going to want to monitor out there before lock. I would say with -3 gaining that steam, let's assume that that ends up being the cut line, that the weather's probably not going to be to our advantage all that much. The reason I say that is if we have threesomes off of holes 1 and 10, there's going to be about a 2, maybe 2.5 hour gap in tee times, which doesn't leave a lot of edge to be had. Now, that doesn't mean that you go out there and only play chalk towards the top end of the board, but it does mean that weather shouldn't be the end all be all with your lineup, which was what I did for round 2. I had plenty of AM guys mixed in. I was about 60-40 between AM, PM. Most of my AM guys were guys towards the top end of the board, but I faded the chalk. I faded guys like Akshay, who went off today. A few other guys that shot like -6 out there in the AM wave that were really popular, I didn't have out there in my lineup. So I take solace in the fact that, sure, maybe the weather didn't work out the way that we thought it would, but even if we were on the right side of tee times, I wasn't going to play all those chonk donkeys that went out there and had themselves around. So just to get those, I didn't remember them off the top of my head, but like an Aaron Rye was pretty chalky. A Ben Griffin was extremely popular over there in the showdown format. So I'm kind of glad that it didn't go our way. I know it's weird to say that, but even if it did go our way, it was going to be a pretty tilting slate getting onto those sort of players. So yeah, that's the review of the weather heading into tomorrow. A lot of that's going to come on to what happens out here with the cut line. And look at that, right? Another player moved up there to make it T63. 3 more go, and it is T66 there at -3. Then we might have those two sums off of hole number 1. So let's go over here to the shots gained metrics. Let's talk through what we're looking for out there in our player pool before we start talking about contest selection, lineup construction, all that sort of fun stuff out here towards the end. What's going on, Ross? You said, how impressive was Pot Getter? The Pot Getter, by the way, is one of the best nicknames out there. A really impressive round. Now, he made a lot of putts. But he set up a birdie look in almost every single hole. But hole 18, when he had that 59 on his mind, the pressure got to him. So hopefully that's not a huge harbinger. I can't say that word. I'm not even going to try to. Hopefully it's not a sign of bad things to come. What's going on, Seanster? Taylor Moore coming through on 18. Yeah, he made the cut, but luckily he went over his strokes line too. So, hey, it's the best of both worlds, right? He comes through for you and he also cashes me out on a slip. So I like that. Was super predictable, says Stat ETL. I agree to disagree, I guess, on that. AM has played easier 12 of the 13 rounds. Yeah, I mentioned that yesterday, right? That's why I said it was so weird that the PM wave played easier out there in round number 1. But, you know, you can say that all you want, man, but I didn't see you in the live stream or commenting that yesterday. So respectfully, I think you might be full of it there. I don't know if you actually thought that. I think you're just trying to get in a little bit of an underhanded jab, which isn't really appropriate, but we'll leave it there. I'll let you say what you want to say. What's going on, Steve? Welcome on in. What's going on, Jason? Watch every one of my shows, but this is your first live watch. Love to have you in there. Today was Taylor Moore's first made cut on Pass Palm. He was a donkey play. I don't disagree with that. I didn't play him, but I don't know who pissed in your Cheerios today, man, but I don't know why you're talking shit to everyone in chat. At first it was me. Next is this random guy who played Taylor Moore. Respectfully, kick rocks, dude. We don't need that kind of negativity in chat. That's kind of crazy if you ask me. What's going on? Sully says, Master Luke, let's get this round 3 slate. Absolutely. And by the way, any deep dives, go ahead and let me know. Let's go through some of the shots gained metrics out there from today. So let's go over here to the approach tab and go through some of the poppers there. Number 1, Aldrich Putt Guider. So though he made a lot of putts, like I said, he gained 5 strokes over there with the putting today. It wasn't all putting. He was actually a little bit spraying it off the tee. He missed almost every single fairway out there. I believe hit 4 of his 13 fairways, which is one of the worst marks out of anyone in the field. But that doesn't stop a bomber like Pot Guider as long as he's not missing out there in the water. Now, what I'll say out there for Saturday, Sunday is when you have a young player like this out there with a really big lead, I don't trust them in this sort of format. They've already gone low. I mean, he made 10 birdies or better out there in round number 2. Not the sort of player that I'm likely going to be using out there in my lineup. So sorry, didn't mean to sort by the putting tab there, but these other approach poppers might be a little bit more interesting. So, you know, Aldrich, he's going to be extremely chalky. He's also a little bit more expensive now than what he was for main slate, but a Rye, he'll also probably get a few eyes out there. But if we go down just a little bit further to guys like a Norman, Valimaki, he's top 10, so he might be also towards the top end of that ownership. But guys like a Jonathan Bird that just hardly snuck through the cut line, they're at T49. He could be worth a look in a few lineups. A David Lipsky here at T49. He also gained over 2 strokes on approach today. These sort of poppers that aren't going to be getting as much attention are the kind of players that I'm going to be paying attention to. Now, if they also gained over 3 strokes of the putter like a Thurston Lawrence did, one of my favorite players that we have out here on the PGA Tour, then maybe I'm not as excited about it because he's likely due for a little bit of putting regression. But if it's a player that hit the ball well in approach, like a Vincent Norman did, but then lost strokes over there with the flat stick, those are the kind of guys that are prime regression candidates. So Vince Norman, I will say there at T18, I don't think he's going to be completely overlooked. In fact, I'd probably have him in that 7 to 10% range when it's come to his ownership tomorrow. Still have to run that, actually see where he comes in over there in my projections. But when you just take a look at the first few rounds, right? It's not just round number 2. Go to the top of the approach list here. This is where you want to take a look at some of the guys that hardly made the cut because, Aldrich already mentioned Hobie getting some attention. Valimaki as well. It wasn't just today that he hit the ball well in approach. It was also out there in round number 1. These sort of players, if you're in a cash lineup, then by all means, go out there and roll them out because you're not worried about ownership out there in that sort of format. With how they're hitting the ball, these are the kind of guys I'm looking for in free balls and matchups out there for tomorrow. I think the betting market's a really good way to go after these sort of players. But in DFS, we've come far enough as a community at this point to know that ball striking matters, and in particular, that shots gained on approach. So that's why I mentioned Aaron Rye getting a few looks as well, right? He's gained nearly 6 strokes approach over the first few rounds. You can extend that to ball striking as well. I would say approach play is the thing that most of your casual PGA DFS players go out there and sort by. But even over here with your ball striking metrics, guys like a Jesper Svensson, you can see he's gaining a bunch of strokes over both categories. A Joe Highsmith over here doing the same thing as well. All players that I think could be a little bit higher owned, but they grade out well. Like there's a reason why a lot of people are going to be getting to them in lineups. If they are a little bit further down the board, so let's say they're towards the middle, like a Joe Highsmith. By the way, if it is threesomes off of both tees, if there is going to be maybe a slight advantage to being one of the first few groups out, he could take advantage of that over there at like T29. It'll be one of the first, let's say 3-4 groups off of either side out there tomorrow. And a player that over the first few rounds has done really good stuff out there with his ball striking. So to go back to the round 2 stats, I like to take a look at some of the short game poppers too that might be having a little bit of negative regression to the field. So I got a pot guider gaining about 5 strokes to the field putting. Erasmus Højgaard, Campos got a little bit lucky out there in the greens. Already mentioned Thurston Lawrence gaining over 3 strokes in that category. It's not like all these guys are automatic fades, but for the most part, these are players that I'm not going to be using in lineups unless they're an elite tier putter where you can kind of count on that from day to day. And there's only a few guys that I would say that about, like maybe a Wyndham Clark when he's really rolling the ball well. Like I could see playing him after a low putting round. Same thing with like a Denny McCarthy. Like they could have back-to-back days of 2-3 shots gained to the field. But when it's a player that's a little bit more inconsistent, like I would say pretty much the entire top end of the board here. I'm not calling all these guys bad putters because Rasmus, when he gets hot, he can make a whole bunch of putts. Aldrich, and his small sample size, has looked like a pretty good putter. But for the most part up here, these are guys that I'm likely going to be fading over there in my exposure. So if they gained a bunch with their ball striking, like that's where you might make an exception. Like Aldrich might be a good example of that. Thurston gaining 2 strokes approach, like that's, and I got to say, I have a soft spot for Lawrence. So, if I was going to make an exception, it would be on that sort of player. But around the green, a lot of this holds true as well. These are guys that are mostly fade candidates. So over here in the round 2 around the green stats, Ryan Palmer gained 4 strokes in that category. Going to be missing the cut though, so not somebody we have to worry about for round 3 showdown. But a Michael Kim, a Lewis Riley, or Riley Lewis actually, not a name that we've seen very often. Hence why I read it backwards there. But all these guys that were 2, 3, 4 shots gained into the positive with these 2 short game categories, it's really hard to count on that from day to day. Now, if you can find a really low owned player here, so for example, like Frankie Sabin, I don't think is going to be super chalky, but he was all short game out there in round number 2. If you're looking for a pure GPP flyer, like I don't think it's out of reason to get to somebody like Sabin and just hope that he keeps the magic going. But unless you're looking for a GPP flyer, you shouldn't be looking at a lot of these kind of players. So especially if they're going to be chalky. So for example, like a Grayson Sigg, I think there's a chance that he might be pretty popular there with the stats that he's shown the first few rounds. He's gained across all 4 stat categories over the first few days and to his top 20. Let me get a sip of water here. Mouth is getting a little bit dry. But like these kind of players, they're going to be chalkier up there in the top 20. And those are the kind of guys that I'm personally trying to stay away from over there in Showdown. If I'm going to play somebody that's a little bit more popular, I'd much rather them be one of the top guys when it comes to their ball striking stats. So just to go back to the full event stuff, let's take a look at the guys who have gained almost all their strokes putting. A pot guider you'd expect to see towards the top, but like a Campos, like you can't expect him to have 10 shots gained putting by the end of the week. Like that seems a little bit crazy. A Salinda, the same thing. Like there's a lot of guys up here. Sapin, unfortunate to see. So he's likely not going to make my player pool, where all of his shots gained, I mean, literally all of them to this point, have come of those 2 short game categories. And I played a bunch of Jaeger this week. I think he was DGen's play of the week as well. So I think a lot of us in chat are probably on a Steven Jaeger here. He gained 6 strokes short game though, which he's still okay with the ball striking stats, so it's not all negative over there with the Jaeger, but we're going to need him to gain more strokes off the tee, and especially over there with his iron play, if he's going to catch up to a pot guider and get that sort of win. So these guys in general, whether it's round 2, taking a look at the first few rounds, players that you might want to knock down over there in your modeling a little bit, but it's not the end-all be-all, as we've already mentioned. Over here, in terms of things you should be looking for in your process, over here on the SHIPIT Nation Stone, we have a lot of extra stuff to add on top of the shots gain metrics. Round 3 expectations will be part of the round 3 Stone. This is the round 2 version that I have up right here. So, one day expired, so don't be using this over there in your process. But bad round regression. So if you're trying to find somebody that maybe started off hot, that ended up having a bad day today, some of the guys that have a really good bad round regression rank might be worth a look out there for round number 3. Round 2 historical, then of course the approach and putting series over here as well. On the approach series, you're looking for the highest true approach delta as possible, and same thing over here with the true approach delta with your putting. So it really makes it easy to go out there and find some plays, right, rather than having to comb through a whole list of shots gained metrics like we just did. And it can be tough to do, right, especially when you have the round 2 stats to look at, the round 1 stats to look at. Somebody like me that's been doing it for quite some time, has been doing it for 5-6 years at this point, it's a little bit easier for me to go through the stats and make some of those decisions. But if you're new to DFS, you're somebody that maybe doesn't watch or play that much golf, having a tool like the Stone is super helpful. It really makes your life a whole lot easier and does a lot of that hard work for you. So I'm sorry if you guys can hear my cat over there. I had a flood in my apartment today that took out a whole lot of my personal belongings. So luckily didn't make its way the whole way over here to my office. So I still have my PC, hence why we're able to do the live stream here tonight. But I got to keep my cats in here because they've got shop vacs, they've got dehumidifiers all over my place right now. And the sound can blow out their eardrums. So I had to keep them both locked in me. You can see but one cat back there. Maybe you can't. She's over here sitting in the box, and the other one's trying to escape right now. So I apologize for all of that extra sound. But yeah, as we're saying, the Stone, the absolute nuts when it goes out there to finding plays. So make sure to check that out if you guys haven't already. Where did we leave off? 4 out of 13 fairways. Honestly, you'd take that. Hey, I'd take that. You'd take that, Ross. But I don't know about a PGA Tour pro. Average is like 8.5 per round. So he was definitely spraying it a little bit. Yeah, if I hit it 330, I'd be okay with hitting no fairways because every time I hit it 330, it'd just feel all that good. Can I deep dive some Kevin Yu? Absolutely. Who, by the way, I believe he just made the cut. He was -4 the last time I checked, which, by the way, I gotta check that because he was a few 6 of 6s that I was locking in if he could make the cut. So yeah, he finished off there at -4. And look at that, guys. I wasn't so sure we were going to see the cut line move. It hasn't locked in quite yet, but look at that. -3 is now T66. So I'm kind of glad that we went over here to this tab. That raises the chances that we get twosomes off of hole number 1. So if we end up getting those twosomes off of hole number 1, we could be looking at a little bit of a weather advantage, which can help us with some of those sleeper plays, right? As I was saying before, like those guys towards the bottom, like T29 or worse, heck, especially the guys that are just going out there and making the cut line. If they're starting early, they have better conditions and they're lower owned, those could be the nuts plays over there for tomorrow. Now, I do want to bring up these Kevin Yu stats out there for the chatter. So round 2, horrendous. I mean, he gained on approach at least. That's really the only positive that you can find in a shots gained profile. But rounds 1, it was a lot more positive. 2 ball striking categories, well into the positive like we're looking for. So I think he was a pretty good showdown play today. Didn't get there, which happens, right? The best plays don't always get there when it comes to the showdown performance. But this is the kind of guy that I would look to for a bounce back, especially if over here on the Stone, he's one of the better bounce back candidates. Now we can go ahead and check this right here. So his bad round regression is actually not that great. So you can see they have him there as a D for that bad round regression. I'm not sure if they changed that round to round. I'd have to double check with Tambo, maybe Hoop on what they do over there with those bad round regressions. But if it's the same out there for all 4 rounds, yeah, I guess not the best for Kevin Yu, but the stats round 1 looked really damn good out there on him. The cut being -4 is brutal. I got to say, I kind of disagree, Derek, but I hate to hear that for you. So it's definitely going to lower that 6 of 6 rate. I actually kind of like that fact. I don't have a whole bunch of 6 of 6s or anything, but almost all of mine are there at -4. So I'd kind of prefer that, but I hate to hear it for you. And same thing with Tony. Hope it swings back. I got to say, I don't necessarily agree. Especially with the weather edge. Like, I really want to have that weather edge tomorrow. Like, if we have the -3s, all 75 players making the cut, we're not getting 2 sums. I can tell you for a fact if we have all 75 players there. And let's see. Let's do a little check-in on that. Riley Lewis in the fairway. Okay. That's a tough approach shot, though. And then Hastings, absolute piss missile to 35 feet. I'd say if you're somebody that's sweating those -3s, you're in a little bit of trouble, especially because Danny Walker, it looks like he's going to par 17 into 18's a birdie hole. Yeah, if you're a sweater of those -3s, I don't want to say that you're cooked, but you're pretty damn close to it. In effect, let me refresh this over here in Data Golf. I'm assuming that they're going to say it's cooked. Yeah, I mean, it's like an 80% chance at -4. We'll see. Hey, maybe it works out that way. You never know. Let's go through some contest selection. So before we go through some lineup construction, all that sort of stuff, I do want to go over what you should be looking for in contests for tomorrow, which we have some pretty decent contests. It's kind of like round 2. When we're out of the United States, they're not going to give us contests like what we had for the Genesis, but you do have this big $25, which is super top heavy with the payout. So it's not my favorite from that perspective. But if you're looking for, a 50K to first GPP, there's at least one over there on the board. You do have this 555, which is a 9 max entry. If I enter this, it would be no way I'd be able to max entry all 9. I'm not willing to play $5,000 out there per showdown slate. But if you are somebody that's a little bit of a higher stakes player, it's not the worst GPP out there with 300 people. Not something that I'd personally play in, but at least worth throwing out there. It's $100 GPP, likely something that has my name written all over it. You can see there that it's a little bit over 10% to first place. So not the worst payout, at least payout structure in human history there. You do have this $5 contest, 150 max, that just like yesterday is an 8th over there, the first place, which isn't ideal. Like in an ideal world, we'd want it to be 10% to first place. So this would be $4,000 over there to first. But just like that $100 single entry where it's just a little bit over that 10% mark, these kind of GPPs are far superior to the GPPs like this top one, right? The big Sin Trap, big $25 GPP, where it's a 4th to first place, right? That's twice the allocation out there to first. Just not ideal, at least if you're looking to be sustainable long-term. If you're looking to play a lottery, go out there, win a whole bunch of money off of nothing. You're lighting money on fire most times when you enter those kind of contests, then so be it, right? Just know what you're getting yourself into if you're playing that big $25. You also have this $200 single entry, which it's a little bit smaller than my liking. I usually like at least like about 100, maybe 110 entries over there in the contest that I'm entering. But if you want a smaller field contest where you got to finish in the top 20% to go out there and cash, not the worst contest to go out there and enter either. So it's not the best slate when it comes to these. If you're a cash buyer, there's a bunch of cash contests you can go out there and enter. Just usually not my sort of thing. But those $100, $200 single entries, where a lot of you should probably be playing. And if you don't want to play a whole $100 single entry, like maybe that's a little bit over your bankroll, these $5, the $12, the $33 single entries that they have over here in DraftKings are contests that you should be looking at. And they're not always going to show up for me. I believe I'm outranked on some of those single entry contests. I'm not able to go out there and enter them. But for, some of your smaller stakes players, there's no shame in entering the $5 single entry, $33 single entry. You'd be better off doing that than entering just a handful of lineups in the big $5 or big $25. I feel like that's what a lot of people do because they see like the $50,000 to first, they see that $10,000 to first kind of prize, and they really want to go after that. And it's like the lottery, right? People go out there, you play the lottery. If you're doing it for harmless fun, so be it. I'd never do that, right? I've never bought a lottery ticket in my life. But if you enter those kind of contests and you're okay with burning your money, then so be it. Go out there and do so. But if you're trying to play this and grind out decent ROI, right, keep it sustainable from week to week, you should be looking for some of those smaller field contests. And the other one I wanted to look at is see if they had that 18 max, which I didn't see it on here, which is kind of disappointing. It's always nice to have that $10 18 max over there on the board, but I don't see it as of right now. It doesn't mean that it won't be added to the board at some point. In fact, I'll refresh this. I'll see if maybe they've added it since the last time that we came on here, but it doesn't look like they have, which keep an eye out for that one. If they do have that $10 18 max, probably my favorite contest that you can enter on all of DraftKings. In terms of your lineup construction, because we haven't gone to round 4 showdown yet, a lot of this comes down to ownership, right? Making sure that we're getting different to the field and making sure that we can move up in those GPPs when our players actually go out there and hit. And that's what I mentioned earlier with obviously the weather edge maybe didn't go my way, but I'm in some way glad that I had all of that bad happen together, because there was no way I was going to play this chalk that went off in the AM wave. Like Akshay, I think being the prime example, he was like 30% owned out there in contests. Aaron Rai was like 15 to 20% owned. Ben Griffin was like 20, even 25% owned out there in some of those single entries. So over here in this sort of contest for tomorrow, I'm not going to let that eat at me, right? I'm going to go out there. I'm still going to go out there and try and take some ownership pivots, because when I hit, I want to be towards the top end of the board. I don't want to be sharing 30% with an Akshay Bhatia. I don't want to be sharing 25% on my 8K range players, where if I have the 30%er up top that hits, right? And by the way, it wasn't just like a couple of those guys went off. It was the 10K guy, the 9K, and the 8K guy that were chalk all went off out there in GPPs. I'd rather it be the slate I'm going out there and hitting when it's the 5-10%ers that are going off. So to give you guys an example of what that would look like, we're looking to get pivots across the board, but you don't have to get crazy about the players that you're getting to. So for example, like with a spend up, it's not like I'm going to somebody that like just hardly made the cut, absolutely sucked. In fact, there's not really a great example of that other than Jake Knapp, who ended up missing the cut over there at -3, unless it moves back to -3, but I'd say a very low chance that happens. Let's refresh this so all these positionings have refreshed for us. And we're looking to take a pivot up here towards the top end of the board. Like these guys, like Rasmus might be a little bit lower owned there at T29. Same thing with like a Harry Hall, even a Michael Kim there at T29, at least compared to guys like a Rye, a Rogers in the top 20, a Steven Yeager and Akshay Bhatia starting in the top 5. Those sort of players are the ones that most people are going to hunker around, which doesn't make them unplayable. I mentioned the ownership as a little bit of a red flag out there in those sort of players, but if you really like the shots gained metrics out there in any of those sort of options, you can still mix them into your player pool. So, the one that I would maybe shy away from, at least for me, might be a Steven Yeager. I have plenty of exposure over there in my main slate, so I'm okay avoiding him out there for round 3 showdown, just because he's been a little bit short game heavy. But somebody like an Akshay that's been pretty solid out there off the tee and on approach. I mean, Aaron Rai, he's towards the top end of the approach list this week. Heck, even Patrick Rogers has been pretty good with his approach play, especially round number 2 out there today. Those sort of players, like I might still play despite them being a little bit higher owned. It's just that you're going to have to offset that towards the bottom end of your build. So personally, I'll be siding towards some of these lower owned players a little bit more. That's just my strategy. I'm willing to take a stance against the field a little bit more than most. I'm willing to go after a lot of that leverage. So like, for example, Erasmus there at $10,200. You go a little bit further down to somebody like a Harry Hall. Like I'm getting to these sort of players. But even if, and just for the sake of this lineup construction segment, even if you want a little bit chalkier, you can still get away with it as long as you compensate towards the bottom. So let me show you what that would look like. Let's use an Akshay. Let's go with a little bit more of a popular 9K option as well. So let's use, I guess, Patrick Rogers at $9,500. I would be one of the higher end players in that range. That puts us at about 7,400 remaining for our last 4 spots. So we can't go too overboard when it comes to our salary here. Let's go with one more kind of chalky player. So I'm going to throw in a Nikolai Højgaard there at $8,500. And that gives us a relatively popular start here. We've got 3 guys towards the top end of the board that are your in-form spend-up options. And as previously mentioned, the ownership's going to be around the guys that are in better form. So with our last 3 spots here, if you chose to be a little bit chalkier up towards the top, this is where all of our leverage is going to have to come in. It's where we're going to have to make sure we don't duplicate ourselves out there with other lineups, and also where we're actually moving up those leaderboards. So we're going to go to the middle end of the 7K range for our 4th man in here. And while it'd be nice to play a Vince Norman with some of his approach stats, he's going to be more popular than we'd like, especially when you started with a core 3 like this. So maybe rather than going to somebody like him, that's where you have to drop down a little bit and go to somebody that's closer to the cut line. So for example, maybe even like a Henrik Norlander down here at -4, a Svensson will be a little bit lower owned there at -5. These are the kind of compensations you have to start to make. And if you want to play somebody that's a little bit chalkier down towards the bottom, it's not like that's impossible to do. Like you could play a Vince Norman out there in your lineup. It's just that one of your spend ups likely has to be a differentiated player. So rather than taking a Nikolai Højgaard, he's going to be a little bit more popular than some of the other players around him. Maybe that's where you punt to a CT Pan who's just made the cut, going to have an early tee time if it is in fact those two sums off of hole number 1. And you can afford to take a Vince Norman at higher ownership now because you made that pivot towards the top. Now, that doesn't mean that you're done making pivots here. We still got to go out there and get some differentiation to the field. So if we go down here to like $7,000, maybe like $7,100, like it'd be nice to play Valimaki. His approach stats this week have been great, and he has good course history here. Nearly won last year in this event, but like a Ben Martin, a Ben Coles are the kind of players that you have to force in because of some of the ownership pieces that you took up top. So that's kind of why I prefer going to guys like a Højgaard, like who, by the way, these guys like Højgaard, Harry Hall, they're still going to have some ownership behind them. All the guys up there in the 9-10K range are still going to be at least about 10% owned, if not closer to 15% out there in most cases. But compared to guys like Bhatia, Jaeger, the guys that are 25-30% owned, they are significantly lower owned, and that matters down towards the bottom end of the board. So if you started with, let's say, those two, let's say you even use Højgaard as your third man in, who I still think is a solid play. Somebody I bet outright this week. So the kind of guy I might still play despite the inflated ownership. Down here in this bottom tier range, because we aren't as chalky as what we had in this first few builds, we have the liberty to maybe play a Ventura, to go down here and go, you know what, I'm going to play a Vince Norman out there in this kind of build. Now, one of your spend downs probably should be different to the field. So you might still want to use like a Ben Martin to round this off, maybe even a Quade Cummins or a Ricky Castillo over there at -5, rather than, let's say, like a Lanto Griffin, Valimaki, who's a little bit more popular, to offset some ownership. And the reason why I say that is even in a contest where you don't have to have all those many pivots, like even if this was a single entry as opposed to a big GPP, it's nice to have that leverage, because if you hit, you go out there, you have a player that shoots -5, makes like 6-7 birdies. It's nice to not have to share them with 15 to 20% of the field. It really helps you out in your long-term ROI. And that's why you see a lot of your PGA DFS pros just obsessing over the fact that they are entering lineups that aren't duplicated. That's like especially the case in things like NFL Showdown. That's probably the most important metric that a lot of those pros are looking at. But even for sports like PGA DFS, where it's maybe a little bit less important, it's things that a lot of people that take this seriously are looking at. So just consider adding that out there to your process. After the fact, I do a lot of lineup studies over there in the contest that I enter to look at how many dupes my lineups have. And, I try to minimize that as much as humanly possible. And I try and learn from it afterwards. Sometimes it's because a site has certain guys graded higher than others, that they're all spinning out the same players in the optimizers when you're running that set of projections. And some of the bigger sites out there, like ETR, for example, SHIPIT, obviously, right? We're here on the live stream over here on the SHIPIT channel. Like the bigger sites that are out there have a tangible impact when it comes to ownership and the kind of combinations that you see. When you do some of that lineup study afterwards, you download the CSV. It's really easy to do, by the way. You go to any of your live contests, you can click download CSV for the event. And if you have any sort of experience on Excel, it's really easy to run some of that stuff. It's extremely beneficial long-term for learning how to play the DFS game. So yeah, that's it for the lineup construction. Let's see if there's any last second questions. If not, that's all I've got over here for round number 3. Smash the like button if you guys haven't already, and let's get after it for the weekend. Hostler missed 13 birdie putts inside 25 feet, had a Rory kind of day. Yeah, that's crazy, dude. I didn't notice that it was that bad for him. I noticed that he was setting up a lot of birdie looks. Sometimes they don't drop, I guess. That's just golf for you. Did it lock at -4? Let's take a look. That's a perfect last second question, by the way. So let's see. So it's there at T65. So no, it is not a lock there. But if Danny Walker is able to birdie this last hole, which he is 240 out on the fairway, that would move it back to a -4 cut line. And then same thing with Antoine Rosner. Now, Rosner is on the green here at 7, so he's got a really good chance to birdie. But then he would also have to hold on at 8 and 9. And 8 and 9, you can see there, 7th most difficult hole. Same thing with 9th. It is 6th most difficult hole that you have out there. It's not a guarantee that he pars both of those. So it is far from locked in at this point. In fact, Who choked? Somebody must have choked if it went back to that number. Somebody really choked, huh? I went the whole way back to -2 or something like that. Yeah, Riley Lewis is the guy that went out there and moved the cut line. So he was greenside in 2. I mean, look at this. Oh, I feel bad for even bringing this up, but he chipped into the water to a front pin location. Like, he shanked it, right? I hate to use the word, but he had, I see what he did. He's in the bunker, didn't realize he was in the greenside bunker, and he bladed it into the hazard. That's tough. I feel bad for the kid. I don't think it's a PGA Tour member, anyone that has full-time status. But yeah, we'll have to see what happens over there with those -3s. That's all I've got, guys. Appreciate you guys stopping by as per usual. Smash the like button, subscribe, by the way, as well. Over here at SHIPIT, we're trying to get to 10K subs as fast as humanly possible. So if you're one of the jabronis that hasn't gone out there and subscribed yet, make sure you do that as well.